Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore that fascinating, kind of undeniable tension between wild supernatural speculation and, well, grounded scientific reality. Throughout history, we've been confronted with these incredible unsolved puzzles that completely defy our understanding. But how we choose to fill in those blank spaces, whether we jump to ghosts, aliens, or stick to cold, hard forensic facts, actually tells us an incredible amount about human nature. So, have you ever wondered why our imaginations naturally run toward the extraterrestrial, the paranormal, and the cursed before we even pause to consider the logical facts? I mean, when faced with the unknown, our brains just crave a narrative. We want a story that makes the mundane world feel a little more magical, or honestly, maybe a little more terrifying. But as we're about to see, the truth is often a whole lot more complex and sometimes far more grounded than the myth. Part 1. Science solves the supernatural. Let's dive right in by looking at some incredibly famous mysteries where modern science and logic eventually caught up with the legends and systematically debunked decades of supernatural hype. Take the 1908 Tunguska event, for example. For years, people honestly believed the massive explosion that completely leveled 800 square miles of Siberian forest just had to be a nuclear-powered alien spacecraft crashing to Earth. And it's a thrilling story, right? But the accepted scientific reality? It's actually a massive meteoroid. We're talking something likely weighing over 200 million pounds. It didn't crash. It exploded in the atmosphere about 5 miles above the ground. So there was no crater, just this absolutely devastating atmospheric shockwave. And that brilliantly illustrates our next case, the chilling Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959. 9 seasoned hikers were found dead in the Ural Mountains. Their tents were ripped open from the inside, their bodies were scattered in the snow, and many were barefoot and stripped down to their underwear. For decades, theorists blamed an unknown alien force or maybe secret Soviet weapons. But the tragic reality? That bizarre undressing is actually a well-documented physiological symptom of severe hypothermia. It's called paradoxical undressing. Freezing victims become so disoriented that they mistakenly feel this intense burning sensation, which literally causes them to shed their clothes right before succumbing to the cold. This kind of scientific reckoning applies to legendary artifacts too. Take the really famous Skull of Doom. It was supposedly discovered in a Mayan temple in Belize by Anna Mitchell Hedges, and rumored to be a 12,000-year-old relic capable of curing cancer and cursing enemies to death. Wild, right? Yet, when the Smithsonian Institution finally put it under a scanning electron microscope, they found the undeniable microscopic markings of 20th century high-speed rotary tools. So it wasn't an ancient curse at all, it was just a very clever 1930s replica. The crucial point here is that sometimes the Earth itself plays tricks on us. Consider the Oak Island Money Pit in Nova Scotia. For over 200 years, treasure hunters have spent millions frantically digging for Blackbeard's gold, Marie Antoinette's jewels, or even the Holy Grail, spurred on by this supposedly vanished cipher stone. But geologists point out that the island is literally covered in natural sinkholes and underground caves. The famous pit is almost certainly just a natural geological formation that naturally floods with seawater. Part 2, Vanishings and Secret Codes. Okay, now we're going to pivot from mysteries with natural explanations to the dark, highly cryptic side of human behavior. Because sometimes the puzzle isn't about nature at all. It's about people who actively want to disappear, leaving absolutely nothing but riddles behind. We absolutely have to start with the daring skyjacking of D.B. Cooper. In 1971, a polite man in a suit hijacked a Boeing 727, demanded $200,000 in unmarked bills, and then did the impossible. He parachuted out of the plane into the freezing, rainy Washington wilderness. Now, what is really fascinating about Cooper's profile is the incredibly specific aircraft knowledge he possessed. He knew precisely what speed and altitude to demand, he knew to keep the cabin unpressurized, and he actually knew exactly how to deploy the aft staircase mid-flight. He was either a serious aviation expert or an incredibly lucky amateur who just vanished into thin air. That brings us to an even stranger case of a deliberate vanishing, the Somerton Beach Man from 1948 in Adelaide, Australia. This unidentified man was found dead on the beach with an incredibly sterile inventory. I mean, every single label had been painstakingly removed from his clothing. He carried zero ID. A suitcase found later at a railway station, which is believed to be his, also had all its clothing labels stripped and contained super mundane items like an American comb and a stenciling brush. It was as if he was intentionally trying to completely erase his own existence. But the most chilling detail? That was found hidden deep inside a secret, custom-sewn pocket in his trousers. It It was a tiny, neatly trimmed scrap of paper with just 2 words printed on it. Tamam shud. It's actually a Persian phrase from a rare edition of a book of poetry called the Rubaiyat. The translation? It is finished or ended. The physical book it was torn from was later found tossed in a random car, and it contained an unsolved code in the back. To this day, the Somerton man's true identity and whatever that code means remain entirely unknown. Part 3. The lead masks mystery. We're going to slow down our pacing now to dive into our ultimate baffle. Seriously, if you take the cryptic codes of the Somerton man, the bizarre crime scenes of Doubt-Love Pass, and the supernatural allure of the Tunguska theories, you get the lead masks mystery. It's an unsolved 1966 Brazilian case that continues to defy absolutely all logic. Let's trace the incredibly mundane final steps of 2 electronic technicians, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. On August 17, 1966, they told their families they were going out to buy work supplies. Very normal. By 14:30, they arrived by bus in Niterói. They bought identical waterproof coats, and they bought a simple bottle of water at a local bar, where, interestingly, witnesses noted Miguel looked highly anxious and kept checking his watch. Finally, they were seen getting into a Jeep that drove them to the base of the incredibly difficult terrain of Vintém Hill. Fast forward 3 days later, and a boy flying a kite makes a gruesome discovery. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the investigators arriving at this deeply surreal, completely undisturbed scene. Manuel and Miguel were dead, lying side by side. They were dressed in matching formal suits covered by their brand new raincoats. Next to them were 2 wet towels and an empty water bottle. But the detail that absolutely shocked investigators, both men were wearing homemade lead masks, like the kind fashioned to cover only the eyes, effectively acting as heavy metal blindfolds. And then, the police found a small notebook in one of their pockets. The exact, haunting translation of the instructions written inside read, 16:30, be at the agreed place. 18:30, swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. They essentially followed a strict schedule to their own demise. But what were those capsules? And what on earth was the mask signal? Here is where the case hits a massive wall due to a tragic investigative flaw. Because there were no signs of a struggle or external injuries, the overwhelming question obviously was, what did they ingest at 18:30? Well, the local coroner's office was just deeply overwhelmed with work that week. The autopsies were delayed for so long that the bodies decomposed to a point where toxicology testing was completely impossible. Whatever those capsules were, they just dissolved into history. So, that brings us to the theories on Vintém Hill. Because of the botched autopsy and the incredibly bizarre staging of the bodies, we're left to impartially explore competing theories that range from the deeply supernatural all the way to the strictly, tragically criminal. On one side, we have the theory of a deliberate, psychedelic UFO contact ritual. On the exact opposite side, we have the grounded possibility of a deceptive robbery and murder plot. Now, we're not endorsing either viewpoint here, but just looking at the source material, it's fascinating how the exact same clues can be read in 2 completely different ways. Were they reaching out to the stars, or were they conned by someone right here on Earth? What's really interesting, though, are the strange breadcrumbs pointing toward the spiritualist theory. Police discovered Manuel and Miguel were part of a local scientific spiritualist group. Back at their homes, investigators found the actual tools used to make the lead masks, alongside a book with highlighted passages discussing the intense luminosity of spirits, which, might perfectly explain why they felt they needed heavy lead blindfolds. Even the famous UFO researcher Jacques Vallée dug into this case, noting that the men had previously caused an explosion in a backyard trying to build a contact device. Oh, and local papers had actually reported an orange UFO hovering over Vintém Hill that exact same night. The enduring unknown. But think about it. If it was a robbery, why leave the scene so incredibly pristine? And if it was a spiritual journey, why end it in a damp, muddy field? As we bring this explainer to a close, we really have to reflect on why cases like the lead masks permanently embed themselves in our collective imagination. They're like the ultimate unfinished puzzles, where every single piece of new evidence just creates a dozen new questions. And at the very center of all these wild global theories, whether it's UFOs, psychedelic rituals, or a meticulously planned double homicide, are just 2 men in matching suits, Manuel and Miguel, 2 friends who walked up a hill together, put on lead blindfolds, and stepped right into the unknown. Their final moments and whatever they saw or thought they were going to see will forever remain a blank page. So, having looked at the evidence, the timelines, the cryptic notes, and the failed autopsies, what do you think happened to the men in the lead masks? I highly encourage you to jump down the rabbit hole and research this one for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the unknown.